Consumers are smarter than they've ever been. A large part of that is due to technology and interconnectivity. But in today's marketing landscape, brands can no longer approach consumers the same way they once were expected to. While the pandemic has definitely played its part, the modern consumer has been shifting into this more woke and empowered consumer, and this has begun since a few years back. As such, while things like the marketing funnel may still be relevant, it's important to re-examine exactly what the modern consumer looks like and how they make their buying decisions in today's increasingly digital world. But before we go into that, it's important to understand just how a person makes a buying decision in the first place. John Dewey, the famous American philosopher and psychologist, noted that there were 5 stages that consumers went through when considering a purchase. The first was need recognition. Here, the consumer recognizes that there is a problem or specific need, and thus will begin their search to find a product or service to satisfy this. Often considered the most crucial step out of the 5, this realization must first exist for a consumer to have any desire to make a purchase at all. If there is no problem or need recognized, consumers most likely will not convert. Once the consumer has recognized their problem or need, they will move on to stage 2 of the consumer decision process, which involves searching for more information. At this point, the consumer is asking themselves whether they could solve this issue, and if not, who or what could be the best option to do so. Third stage is where they evaluate the alternatives. While this isn't a completely new stage entirely, but more of a blend to the one above, it is important to be wary of it. That is where most businesses can keep or lose potential customers. It is no surprise people evaluate alternative products when making a purchase decision, especially the more expensive the item is. You don't want your hard-earned money going into something that might not even be worth it. Once all 3 stages mentioned earlier are done, the consumer makes a purchase. This stage involves the consumer shaping an intention to buy from a service or a product. During this stage, the consumer decides who, when, and where to buy from. A decision is finalized at this stage, and according to the writers of the essay, The Buying Decision Process, the only thing that influences this decision is negative feedback and/or a drastic life change. Finally, after the purchase, the consumer then goes through a process that involves evaluating whether the purchase was satisfactory or not. In this stage, the way the consumer feels will influence how they will respond to the brand in the future. During this stage, consumers may experience cognitive dissonance or a form of buyer's remorse, determining whether or not he or she feels regret for the purchase. Now, there is no denying that people's behaviors have changed since the global pandemic. The modern consumer is no longer searching for things the same way as before, and brand loyalty has changed. While we go into details of changing consumer behaviors in another video, some notable behaviors caused by the pandemic that may influence the modern consumer are things like potential splurging. During the severe peaks of the pandemic, lockdowns and store closures were rampant. As such, consumers have had a dying itch inside, wanting to go out and simply splurge. While in times of crisis and uncertainty, the general tendency is for a person to hold back on discretionary purchases, which for the most part has happened. However, if you hold this long enough, the resulting consequence is an outburst spending spree. There's also been a growing wave of impatience. As of recording this, the pandemic still has not completely ended. While things have calmed compared to a year or 2 ago, many countries still have regulations and rules to stay inside. As such, people are growing more impatient. Ayelet Fishbach, a professor of behavioral science at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, notes that once something is almost over, naturally we become more impatient. As she states, the surprising effect is as things become near, it is harder to wait for them. This, on top of added doorstep deliveries from online shopping, is bound to create a generation of consumers that simply cannot wait. Consumers have also become more technology-enabled. From sheer necessity, consumers have adopted new technologies. Naturally, this has changed the nature of how we share and discover information. The lasting impact of digital technology on the consumer's behavior is pervasive and cannot be ignored. Also, modern consumers have become more curious and creative. On the flip side of staying inside for years, people are becoming more curious to what new skills, tools, and services they can learn from. While some people may be lying around, waiting for things to be over, there is a large group of people that are doing what they can to upskill and be better, preparing for the new normal. As such, the new workforce will be rife with competition, and as creators, there can be opportunity for producing products and services for this type of consumer. Now, typically in the past, marketers have defined specific touchpoints, using the term marketing funnel to express the overall journey the consumer makes to get from awareness to loyalty. While it has had many iterations, the base foundation stems off of the AIDA model, where the user discovers the brand, dives deeper into the product, gets more interest and consideration, and finally makes the purchase, thus becoming a loyal customer. While the funnel is still applicable in a lot of cases and shouldn't be ignored, it implies that the journey is more one way than two. It also suggests that the consumers are systematically narrowing their considerations down to buy products. It proposes that brands and marketers are solely responsible for nudging the consumer along a linear process. However, this way of looking at the consumer journey may not show the full picture, as a brand-consumer relationship is much more two-way today. Moreover, it's no longer a linear journey, but a circular one, with 4 phases in which the marketer must work to get the consumer's attention. As you can see from this graph, first we start off at an initial consideration. This is when the consumer considers a set of brands, basing their opinion around perception and exposure. Then they move along what's called the active evaluation phase. This is when the consumer gathers information and filters out the choices. When the consumer chooses who to buy with and makes a purchase, we are at closure. And in the post-purchase phase, much like John Dewey's 5th stage, this is where the consumer sets expectations on their experience and uses this to influence their decision for loyalty. What brands do here is a deciding factor of whether that person becomes a one-time or returning customer. With this more circular journey, where a constant feedback loop leads to loyalty, the modern consumer has become more empowered. In the past, marketing was driven purely by companies, where messaging was put on consumers via advertising and other media channels. However, today, consumers rely on other customers or influencers to help drive their decisions. In fact, during the previously mentioned active evaluation phase in the circular journey, research showed that more than half of those touch points were spent looking at internet reviews, online research, and hearing word-of-mouth recommendations, all of which are consumer-driven marketing activities. This demonstrates that modern consumers have taken more control of the process. Instead of having everything pushed onto them, they pull information their way to make the most informed buying decision. Beyond what I've mentioned in this video, there are plenty of other behavioral changes that have resulted since the pandemic, shifting the trajectory of consumer behavior. If you'd like to learn more about these 14 key changes, watch the video to the left and don't forget to subscribe to be fed more videos about our buying minds.